Hi, welcome to Connecting the Dots, the podcast where we share our stories from the battlefield of consulting. I'm your host, Johnny Hill.
Hey, I'm Kareem Jamal.
I'm Phil Gambling.
I'm Oscar Hernandez.
Today we're talking about estimation, and I estimate it'll take about 30 minutes. But if you're listening to this now, you probably see it's way longer than that. So let's jump in. So kicking it off, I think we should probably start by talking about why estimation is important. Like, what's the whole point of it?
So there's many points. The common example is so we as consultants need to price out a potential new project, and we've got to base that on something. So you have to estimate a project up front so we can bid on that. Maybe you're going into sprint planning. How much time do you think this new feature is going to take? Will it fit into the sprint? Give me a ballpark on how many hours. Maybe it'll take more than one person, that kind of thing, or it can be broken up. So estimation is helping us answer those questions.
I think it also helps set a contract between the developer and the project owner.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a gauge, right? You need some sort of thing to base on just to set expectations correctly. Like you're estimating all the time, right? If you're planning dinner with your family, like, I'll be home around, 6-ish. That's an estimation because you're assuming that you'll be done with work and traffic will be so-and-so, right? And so just to get people synced and aligned on things, you have to have something to go off of.
Right. Yeah. Like, obviously in this context, we're talking about estimation from like the software development perspective. But yeah, I like what you mentioned, Kareem. Everyone is estimating at some point or another all the time, whether it's how long it takes to get home, how long it'll take me to finish this project I'm working on at home, whatever it may be. And obviously it goes into other industries as well. So my hope is that as we're talking through this, it's helpful for people in our industry, but also like picking up some helpful tips for if you work in other industries or just for everyday home life things that come up that you have to kind of estimate the effort for. I know one thing that it's easy for me to get stuck in when I'm asked to estimate something or estimate the effort to put something together. It's easy for me to think it's all about me. Like, oh, I just need to like figure it out and forget that, oh, well, this is to benefit other people. And this is like one piece of the estimate that other people are also working on.
Yeah. One thing that I know as developers, we get very hung up on, I'm estimating really just like hands-on keyboard, putting down code time. But you also, and this kind of comes with experience, got to think more about all the overhead, all the meetings, all the discussions, all the just like reading code, figuring stuff out that go into getting that thing done. Not just, okay, I'll estimate what it takes someone who's familiar with this concept to work on. No, like maybe you're going to hand this to someone who's going to have to spend a little bit of time ramping up on the subject too. And that's got to be included.
You got to expect the unexpected and estimate the unexpected,
the unknowns and the unknown unknowns.
Yeah, like having margin for that.
Yeah. And
also keeping in mind that even if you were in this vacuum where there wasn't this overhead, which is not likely, but even if you were, the whole time you're sitting, hands on keyboard programming or whatever, working, you're not going to be fully productive that full time, right? So also factoring that in. You yourself have downtime as well. You have ups and downs as you try to work through the code or the designs or whatever it may be.
Yeah, everyone feels the after lunch slump, I think, where your productivity goes down just a little bit.
Yeah, I feel it after all 3 of my lunches.
That's kind of where the margins you're talking about, Johnny, are alluding to that. So we gather up estimates, and then ideally someone will take that and apply some kind of factor or margin or padding, whatever you want to call it, to try to also capture some of those things. So that might be one technique is okay, I know in my devs we're really thinking about actual time to work on it, but I know no one actually works like 100% productive 8-hour day. So let's factor that in, whatever your factor of productivity is. And then on top of that, other things that maybe you do put in, okay, we'll put in 25% for just overhead, and it will just be a general rule rather than try to put it into every feature, kind of take the project sum and then apply those margins later to help deal with that.
Yeah, and it's really helpful for like piecing work together too, because a lot of times, no matter what you estimate, it still won't change the release date. Particularly like consider other tasks and if they can fit in certain places, especially if certain things come up that are higher priority that really need to be done before other tasks.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the estimation affects the scope of the project. You're not estimating and saying, how quickly can I get this done? Like, oh, here's everything we need to do and it needs to be done in a month. Okay, I'll just like optimistically try to cram it all. Like, I think honest estimation helps the project team to realize what is and isn't doable in the time period you have. And like you're saying, Oscar, to figure out, oh, well, there's more room than we thought. Okay, what else can we put in? Or, oh, wait, there's no way we can do this. Okay, we need to strip some things back. And like, that's okay. It's part of the process.
Right. It's all about setting expectations. And I think it's another thing that I see with estimations is what an estimate is not. It's not a fact. It's not set in stone. You know, it is our best guess. Hopefully it's an educated guess, but it's by no means. And a lot of people misunderstand this. They hear, oh, he said it's going to take 2 weeks. Well, he'll be done exactly 2 weeks. Like, no, it's not that. It's just a way to gauge the scope of things, the level of effort, and then try to set realistic expectations.
And it helps with just giving the client some options, right? So they come at you with a problem. If you don't have the estimates broken down correctly, then they don't have anything to go off of. It's either all or nothing. But with the estimates, then they have some power to say, okay, I have this much budget, or I have this tight timeline. What can we fit in? And then that's when you can go back and forth and figure out what works, what brings the most value in the amount of budget or time for this project.
Yeah, it's the iron triangle, right? Features, time, budget, and you can pick two.
Mm-hmm. Right. And another thing from estimates is as you get into it and you walk through it, you'll identify dependencies and blockers, which then sort of help highlight what things you'll be dependent on. And it's good to identify those early on. So the people that you are depending on know that they have to have stuff ready for you by the time you get to that point. So it just helps highlight those pieces as well.
That's a really good point. I have always felt that I get to know a ticket a lot better, or some sort of task a lot better once I start doing the estimation. Brings you a lot closer to what's required.
Yeah, and in some ways, the estimation is part of the like problem solving process. Like you're better understanding the problem and what it'll take to solve it, what questions you need to ask. Whereas if you don't do the estimate and you kind of go into it blind, you might realize partway through like, oh, this is way bigger than I thought. So even just thinking about like estimation is another tool in the project management tool belt. Like it's a tool intended to help the project go more smoothly and to help the managers and the team figure out how to best maneuver things to make that happen.
Yeah, Project I was on recently, they had kind of an interesting approach that I liked to that problem of new feature comes into the backlog, but no one really knows what it's going to take to work, like how much effort it's going to take. So they'll carve out a spike ticket, basically just a time box of like, okay, spend a day or two just for the capturing the work of that estimation, of that research, knowledge gathering, to then inform the actual thing rather than just throw it in there and hope for the best. Like actually calling that out as an activity as happened separately is useful. Like I'd say for a sprint planning case, because I've seen a lot of planning get off the rails or just blocked by, well, okay, Dev, can you just put a time on this, and like, and in front of the whole team in a 1 hour meeting or whatever, that just has to happen. No, that was like, okay. And instead of that, hey, how about we just schedule you as a couple days doing that research? And that kind of takes the pressure off.
That makes me think it's kind of similar to user testing in a lot of ways. Like you're validating how, like in user testing, you're validating if the idea you have is the right one. And in estimation, you're validating if your assumptions of how long, like how much effort something takes is correct. So I feel like there's similar overlap in, there are some projects you'll be on where there's hesitancy to do user testing because you feel like you don't have time to spend on that. So like, how would you approach in a situation where someone says, we don't have time to estimate, just get started?
Yeah, that's I don't know. You're gonna get what you're gonna get when the time's up. Like it's that's
So
why. I mean, if things are that tight, then yeah, you just, well, let's start working and maybe still try to check in regularly and understand that, at what point, I guess, like kind of backing up to the point of when we're using an estimate to help see the cost of a project, it also is a forcing on what are the priorities. So you said you want this laundry list of features, but until you really see what it'll take to get those features, up front, it's like everything's the same priority. We need everything, we need it by this date. Well, okay, that's not possible. Our estimate informed us it's going to blow through a month past that date.
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, here we've broken things that we estimate things up into nice modules, a menu, if you will, of things. Now we prioritize that list. What are things that are maybe not a dependency to others, or can be pulled in or pushed out? And then that really just like, so the estimate in that case really informs like the client's priority.
Yeah, I think
And
if estimation wasn't possible, you'd really have to communicate every step of the way with the client so that they're aware of your progress, since they don't have that contract to go by with what
And-
hours you propose.
And that's more overhead added to
Yeah.
your time that might not have been captured in an estimate.
one misconception is that estimates need to happen at the beginning, right? And then you just go on and start working on it. But that's really not the case. You might have some estimates up front, but throughout the process, you should really be estimating at finer grained levels throughout, to sort of rebase how what your estimates are and how long and what new discoveries you've had and things like that. So it's a continual process, not just a one-time thing.
Yeah, those upfront estimates always be the worst because you had the least information about the project. So they should be the least trusted, the most expected to change.
Yeah, it's like no one ever estimates something perfectly correctly. That's the point of it being an estimate. You're not saying this will take 2 weeks and that's exactly how much time I have and then it'll be done. It's an estimate. In some ways it's a best guess, and even a wrong best guess is better than nothing.
Right.
If you can set some expectation, I think even if you can maybe overestimate, I think that anything helps.
Well, and like Kareem, you were saying, just like people tend to assume that estimation happens at the beginning, there's also like different kinds of estimation that can happen throughout the process, right?
Right. So like early on, you might be estimating the whole thing at a certain level. Maybe it's even before the project or to get the bid in the first place.
Right.
And then throughout, maybe you're estimating in smaller chunks. So, hey, for this next 2 or 3 week sprint, let's really figure out how many things we can fit in. So we need to estimate those specific parts of it at a much, deeper level. Just to set expectations of, what do you expect at the end of this sprint? What can we demo to the clients after this? And constant demos are always helpful as well, because they help the client gauge where we're at. And sometimes they may want to pivot, sometimes they may not. And so just being able to set expectations using the demos and the estimates as sort of tools to help guide you in that direction.
Yeah, sometimes there's a lot of unknowns too. And even when you've asked all the questions you can and try to gather all the requirements you can, there's still things that pop up. And so sometimes I like to give a range when there's a lot of when there's a lack of clarity, and then set the expectation that there might be some more time spent in certain areas once we get to those points.
Right.
And it's like wireframes and designs and anything else, early on, it's lower fidelity. Then as you get more into it and you find out more information and things start to become a little more clear, then you move over to higher fidelity estimates and wireframes and other.
Yeah, I think it's important also when we're talking about estimation to dig into some of the misconceptions about it. Like, I think one of the biggest misconceptions we kind of hinted on earlier is that it needs to be perfect, like not an estimation, like a fact. And I think one of the other like misunderstandings people can have is that it's all on me and like I have the final word in my estimation. Whereas like a good manager knows how to work with the estimates given from their team and create margin there. It's not like, oh, I said this would probably take 2 weeks and now it's taking longer. Oh no, we're sunk. You know, a good manager knows how to work with that and build in that margin so that as things inevitably come up, you can shift and refocus.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like to the point earlier about everyone had different levels of way of padding, and I think it actually kind of makes me think of another point is as you get to know your team, different people's estimates may need a different factor of adjustment. Like, oh, Kareem says it's going to take 2 days. That's always 2 weeks.
That's
Phil
right.
says 1 week. It's
Sorry,
probably
Kareem.
but like
It's true.
But I know, but really actually like more if you're looking, the more junior you are, the worse your estimates are probably going to be. And hopefully as you're more senior, you've seen a lot more and so you'll have more accurate estimates. So that is depends on who is coming up with the estimate. But I think like, and maybe this is we're kind of getting into ways to help improve estimates. I've always found the best estimates are always it's never just me. If I'm the only one providing an estimate, that's going to be terrible. Like the best are when you have a diverse set of opinions, maybe 2 or 3 people with different roles, different areas of expertise, maybe working directly with a project manager. They will ask completely different questions and they will kind of have that view of like, well, I know that usually in past projects that usually took longer. Are you sure that it's a 16-hour thing? Like, you know what? No, we should bump that up. So like, it's this constant like give and take. And I've really been a fan of planning poker especially for like sprint planning or backlog grooming, have a group of people, maybe the QA, the dev manager, front end, back end dev, and everyone looks at a story, and then you all at the same time throw out, maybe the story points, hours, days, whatever, but like on a Fibonacci sequence. So that as things are higher, they are also like more likely to take longer because they're less understood. But that's always interesting because the things that everyone's pretty keyed into, they come in with about the same rating of time, but then the ones that have huge discrepancies always generate a good discussion. And then it's when you figure out things like, oh, I totally didn't see that point. So yeah, let's call that out. Or no, you're really overthinking this one. Let's rein you in. But it's just like, you got to have more than one opinion because everyone's going to look at the same problem differently.
Yeah, that's an important point. More than one person, and preferably, in different expertise too. Because if you have front end people, they may not understand the complexities of the back end stuff they're estimating, and vice versa,
Right.
Or even if you're front end, a React person may not understand all that's needed to estimate an Angular project, or an Oracle person might not understand a graph database as well, like all the stuff that needs to happen in Cassandra or Janus Graph and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. So having the diverse set of expertise doing the estimation, make sure you have your basis covered to where people are understanding the problem correctly,
and people that are feel safe expressing their opinion too. Because I could see a mistake of the one senior person and some junior developers estimating, oh well, Phil keeps saying it's this, he must be right. Like, no, I'm wrong very often. And so like, it definitely that group would be a collection of peers who were open and honest, because that's the only way you're going to get a good estimate.
And non-judgmental.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Because if you say something and all of a sudden the group reacts, you're more likely to start with the group think on your next estimates instead of your honest opinions.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of shyness when it comes to younger developers or newer developers estimating, especially when the project owner is looking over them. They feel like they have to maybe, fit within the confines of whatever their project owner expects. But really, it's about being honest with how long you think it'll take. So,
right.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Lots of times there is a case where the project manager says it has to fit here, or you give them some estimates and they're like, no, that's not going to work. Lessen these. It's like, okay, but that's the honest opinion. But now you're having to cram, instead of just cutting out, you're mindlessly just going in and cutting the estimates in half, which, is not going to lead to a good result.
Right. Yeah. If you're cutting the estimate, you should also be cutting the scope of work in that situation. And I know, like, the first time I was asked to estimate something, I felt that, like, I felt guilty for saying, oh, I think it'll take me an hour for each of these steps, and like, looking back, I was way off with my estimate, and it took about twice as long as I initially thought. And then, I initially thought this much, and then said, oh, well, that's probably too much, and I'll cut it back. So it ended up being like 4 times more effort than I initially estimated, just because I was afraid that the number was too big and I'd get in trouble, or people would be like, that's ridiculous. And really, it's like, no, I feel like, at least for me, a helpful rule of thumb is, all right, what's my first like gut reaction? And then I should probably double that, because there's going to be hidden stuff that I don't think about. And that always comes up.
And you bring up a good point, a phenomenon of just psychologically, people always underestimate their own work and overestimate other people's work. And that's another reason the planning poker, just the group estimation, works better, because you're now estimating other people's work, especially if it's a task that's not your own. And so that's where it kind of helps break that, because exactly like you said, for many reasons, we all want to seem like, if I say a number that's too high, then that I'm going to get perceived as being like inefficient or incompetent, right? Exposed as the imposter I am, as calling back to past podcasts. So, but that's where I think over time, you hopefully get over that. You develop techniques, just like you said, like go with that first hunch and then double it, kind of have your own internal factor. I think, that definitely just comes with experience and pattern matching of, okay, well, in the past I did a similar screen. How long did that take? Well, that took 2 weeks. So,
and it can be a conversation too, right? Like, it's not something that you have to do by yourself over in the corner. Like, if you're junior and you think it's going to take this long, you can go to someone who's maybe a little bit farther along and say, hey, this is what I think. Does that sound right? And they may say, for someone at your skill level, that sounds right. As you grow and get better at your craft, it'll probably go down. Or they may say, no, you forgot about this whole element. And like, it's okay to have a conversation around it. It's not like the first thing that comes to your head or the first thing you say is automatically what you have to commit to. It's a bit of an iterative back and forth process. And, that's just part of it.
Right. And then no matter what you land on, you still double it, because that's just reality, right? I mean, accounting for that self-optimism is an actual thing. And that's something you learn as you gain more experience. Like, it might seem a little weird, but it actually, in reality, if you look at the empirical evidence, that usually happens that way, where the rule of thumb is you take your honest estimates that you think are right and you multiply by 2 or 3, which may sound a lot, but just given all the other overhead and things that are happening, it usually ends up being that way. That's why my 2-day estimates turn into 2 weeks. I mean, to give you an example, right? So whenever I go do some voluntary work at, construction or carpentry, I'll tell my wife, oh, I'll be back in, an hour and a half. Because in my head, it's so clear, it's straightforward. I need to go do this, and this, right? It can only take an hour and a half max. And she's like, okay, I will see you at midnight. I'm like, no way. And then lo and behold, I'm strolling home after midnight, and it did indeed take 5 hours, not 1.5, right? Just because in our head, it's so clear. And so we think, hey, it can't be that difficult. It's simple. But when you actually, put your head down and start doing the things, time just adds up very quickly.
Right.
Sometimes it's good to get an opinion from somebody else too. Ask others who are experts in the subject to sort of help demystify certain concepts for me if I ever get like really stuck. And that's always been very helpful.
One of the things as you're doing the estimates is not to keep anything in your head, right? Write it all down. So always write your assumptions down as you're doing these things, right? I put this estimate on here, assuming so-and-so is going to happen, or assuming someone's doing this, or assuming that this will be ready in time when we get to this, right? So always write down your assumptions. That way, someone looking at it is not left in confusion on why is it going to take this long? Oh, because of these assumptions.
Yeah, that's like a good, also important when we are, negotiating contracts for work and things, things don't always go perfect. You can look back at like, what were the assumptions we made? Okay, well, this didn't hold up, because of XYZ. So that affected, this had this cascade effect on everything else. So it goes two ways. It's also protection for the estimator. It's also sometimes if you feel bad about like, well, I got to come up with this estimate, but I really don't know. Okay, I'm just going to say I made this assumption, and it's just sort of like, it's kind of almost like a relief, like, well, I'm guilt-free because I wrote down an assumption. But it also just helps you move forward with the estimation, because you can get stuck. You can get totally hung up on the things that you don't know, and then not want to estimate at all. Like I just don't want to put my name to this because I just don't know any of these facts. Like, okay, that also isn't helpful. I think we still need an answer for whatever it is that we're trying to do here. So yeah, it's assumptions and estimates, I think, should go hand in hand.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the methods or the approaches you can take when you are estimating, because I mean, obviously there's not one right way you always have to do this. We talked a little bit about like, what's your first thought and double that, but like, there are obviously more, there's more nuance to it. And there's more ideas or methods or things you can do when you're estimating. So I know one of the ones that I've tried to implement more and more is like, okay, well, here's the worst case scenario, here's best case scenario, and here's kind of where we're most likely to wind up. So you have a little bit of a range, and that can kind of give you a little bit of that wiggle room to say, yeah, here's what I think, but there's possibility for it to go here or there.
Yeah, I really like that one, like going line by line and having a low, medium, high, or like, worst case, best case, expected case, I think is what we called it before. I think that's pretty effective. It also helps you key in on the things that have a very wide range. Then it's okay, maybe we need to look closer at those. The things that kind of come in pretty okay, the low and the high aren't deviating too much. And then, well, okay, maybe we're confident on those, but the ones that have a like worst case just goes off the rails. Well, let's like dig into that. Maybe we need to break that one down more, or, maybe that's an assumption we need to document. I think, because it also just helps allow you to be honest, I think, because I think if you're just asked for one number, you're going to tend to want to give best case. Right. If you ask me explicitly for worst case, then I'm probably more likely to just be like, whoa, well, yeah, I guess this could crap out. Oh, that'll take a whole month, so but it's good to see that.
I always like to add as much as I can to the estimate as it relates to the task. And so anything like if there's any time to get to take care of any bugs or testing of the task, I always add some time for code review and then handling any comments in the code review. Mm-hmm. And then if there's going to be any demos on the task that I'm working on, I'll add that in as well, or meetings that are required to further explain certain things in the task.
And you mentioned code reviews, and one other thing to mention there is you should account for time not only for the actions you need to take on your code reviews based on feedback, but sometimes set aside for reviewing others' code as well, right? Because they're going to be asking you to review their code. So all these things that sort of add up, testing, demos, daily stand-ups, working with the designer back and forth sometimes to figure out like the details of how this is going to behave, or the micro interactions, things like that. All those things are not time that you're actually specifically coding, but are still needed, and so need to be factored in at some point or another in the estimates.
Right.
Yeah, you sort of get into the habit of picking those things up and knowing which tasks require those sort of background underlying tasks, and then you over time you just sort of get used to it.
And there's different approaches that people take, right? We really like the low, medium, high effort. It's simple enough. It works well for us. Other people have like more complex methodologies. There's Six Sigma. There's other ones that help you break it down more and really go into higher fidelity at a deeper level. For our cases, usually we don't feel the need to do that because it's not necessary, but it varies by industry and project as well. So use the best tool that's right for you, but no need to go in the deep end if you don't need to, because the truth is estimates are hard and estimates are likely wrong, right? But they will help get you in sort of the ballpark area, and you can keep refining that ballpark as you learn more. And so use the tool that's right for you. But in our experience, just some simple approaches that help gauge the rough level of effort for the task and help highlight the places where you're uncertain, that really helps.
And different companies and different teams use different types of estimation. So like you might hear like t-shirt size estimating or just hours. I think we've talked mostly about like hour estimating, like how long it would take. But some teams also use Fibonacci numbers to do estimation. So there's a lot of different techniques.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that there are so many different techniques, but the real value isn't like the specific technique, it's just the practice of it. Estimation is important because it's that first step, it's part of the planning process. And you can spend a lot of time focusing on which method is the best, but as long as you're putting in the effort and you're having those conversations, like you're doing something right. And I think, just kind of one thing to hit on before we wrap up is that, we talked a lot about how it's easy to kind of get scared away from estimations because you feel like you're committing to something that's really vague and unknown. And like, it's okay to recognize that it takes practice. Like no one is good at estimating, especially at the beginning. I know several people on this call have been doing estimations for a long time and are still uncomfortable with it. Like that's just part of what it is. And it's okay to recognize it's something that you're not great at and it's something you need to grow at, or it's something you need to pull other people in to ask for help or ask for thoughts on, hey, does this sound right? Or is this way off? So it's okay to kind of recognize that and to treat it as something to constantly be growing in, and with the awareness that your estimate's probably wrong, and that's okay.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely something. And I think a lot of developers feel this because we tend to be, we tend to deal more in absolutes or, analytical. I like to give you facts and truths, and estimates have this feeling of almost like I'm lying or misleading because I cannot say with 100% certainty this will, happen the way. And like you said, you got to accept that that's not what the point is. It's not. I am not telling you. I'm not giving you. I'm not looking at a crystal ball and telling you, yeah, we'll be done in 3 weeks. I'm just giving you my best guess so we can work with it. But yeah, it's always something I continue to be uncomfortable with. I think I've gotten better at it as I've seen more projects and I've had, like you said, more practice. So there's more past like patterns to match against. It becomes a little bit more like less of really having to go through the details and just kind of comparing, well, this screen is a lot like this thing we built over here. And yeah, that took about this much time. And you just build that up over time. But it's like a necessary evil.
And it helps if you foster that culture of that openness and psychological safety, where you are free to speak honestly about the estimates and talk about things that you don't know, admitting that, hey, I'm not the best person to estimate this part of it. No need to feel like an imposter. You're just admitting, hey, I have room to grow here. But just helping foster that environment where people can be honest about what they really think will lead to better estimates and thus better expectation management and happier clients at the end of it.
If your estimates are always wrong anyway, an arrogant estimator is far worse than a open-handed estimator.
Agreed.
Phil, I really liked what you said, that estimations in a lot of ways, they're a necessary evil, but they're a helpful tool. They're a helpful first step in that kind of project management process. And it's a helpful way for the whole team to kind of get on the same page and get an idea, what are we aiming for? Are we way out of scope? Is there anything we need to trim back? Do we actually have room to work with here? And learning how to work within that team context and recognizing that there is a strength that comes to a project when you get a bunch of people in a room together and talk about, hey, what's it actually going to take to pull this off? And kind of just recognizing that it's for your benefit. It's something that, it's not saying it's something you're hardcore committing to, you have to do in the moment, You have to exactly meet that estimation you're making. Your estimation's probably wrong, and your manager probably knows that and knows how to work with the numbers there to create the margin that you're going to need for your project to be a success. So it's not something you have to be afraid of or run from. It's not always the easiest thing in the world, but it is doable, and there are ways you can continue to learn and to grow and to become better at estimating. And that's what we're all doing. We're all always improving, and it's okay to raise your hand, to ask for help, to ask if your estimations are right or wrong. And at the end of the day, estimation isn't going to make or break the project, but it is an important part of helping make sure your team is set up for success and able to have the kinds of conversations they need to make their project a success. Thanks for connecting with us today. If you have a complex software problem that needs solving, thoughts on what we discussed today, or ideas on what topics we should tackle next, feel free to reach out to us at podcast@experoinc.com or on Twitter @experoinc. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you next time.
Of course, we're wrong because it took a
Yeah,
little
of course,
bit.
it's gonna. Yeah, my timer says 40 minutes.
That would be a good end
That's
though.
the
To be
end,
like,
yeah.
that's the hook.
By the way, we said we estimate it'll take 30 minutes, but it took 51. So
Yeah.
Stick with us till the end to find out if you're right. Don't look
So
at
we-
the timestamp.
yeah, we weren't wrong about doubling the estimates, 30
Yeah.
to 51.
Yeah. 10 best lessons about estimation. The actual time it takes to estimate will shock you.
Yeah.
Oh man. Cool.
All
right.
right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
y'all.
y'all. Coffee. See you guys.
See
Have a
ya.
good one.